The weight of generations settled upon Scott Greene's shoulders the moment the will was read. Not just the weight of grief, but the undeniable heft of a legacy, a sprawling $2 million estate, a testament to his family's hard work, nestled in an affluent, manicured neighborhood. This wasn't just a house, it was memory, security, a future. But within weeks, a shadow began to creep across the sun-drenched lawns. It started with whispers, then scrutiny, and soon, a relentless campaign by a woman who seemed determined to claim what was never hers. It felt like more than just neighborhood politics. It felt like a calculated attempt to unravel everything. Before we dive in, comment which country you're watching from. Let's see how far this story travels. Scott Greene had always cherished the sprawling property his grandparents had built. It was a place of childhood summers, holiday feasts, and quiet contemplation. Inheriting it felt like a sacred trust. He envisioned maintaining its beauty, perhaps even modernizing it slightly, honoring its history while ensuring its future. The neighborhood itself was picturesque, a tapestry of well-kept homes and pristine gardens governed by a homeowners association. Most residents saw the HOA as a necessary guardian of property values, a committee ensuring uniformity and appeal. Scott, a thoughtful man who appreciated order, initially saw it that way too. However, within the HOA hierarchy sat a figure known only by her first name, Karen. She was a long-standing member, deeply entrenched, possessing an almost territorial sense of ownership over the neighborhood's aesthetic and its residents' lives. Her gaze, sharp and perpetually critical, seemed to fall on Scott's property with an intensity that felt disproportionate from the outset. He was the newcomer, the inheritor, and perhaps, in her eyes, an outsider who didn't quite fit the established mold, despite his family's deep roots. The initial interactions were polite but strained, marked by Karen's unsettlingly direct critiques of minor details, a slightly overgrown bush, a fence panel that seemed to age overnight. Scott, eager to be a good neighbor, made every effort to comply, yet the complaints only seemed to escalate, morphing from suggestions into thinly veiled demands, each carrying an undercurrent of something far more unsettling than simple rule enforcement. The petty grievances soon began to feel like a systematic dismantling. Karen, often acting as the self-appointed enforcer, started levying fines for infractions Scott couldn't even see. A specific shade of neutral paint on a garden gnome deemed off-brand. A bird feeder placed too close to a property line, allegedly disrupting wildlife patterns. These weren't the typical concerns of an HOA. They felt arbitrary, personal, and crafted with an almost malicious intent to find fault. He noticed how Karen's focus was almost exclusively on his property, while neighboring homes with similar or even more noticeable issues went unscrutinized. It was an intense, invasive level of oversight, a constant barrage of written notices and veiled threats of legal action, creating an atmosphere of perpetual anxiety around the very home meant to be his sanctuary. He started feeling watched, his movements, his deliveries, even his guests subjected to unspoken judgment. Karen would often appear unannounced, walking the perimeter of his land with a clipboard, her expressions a mixture of disapproval and satisfaction. The fines mounted, threatening to eclipse the perceived value of even a $2 million home, and the sheer volume of demands began to wear him down. He saw how rules that were meant to ensure community harmony were being weaponized, twisted into instruments of control and exclusion. The language used in the HOA notices, ostensibly about property standards, began to echo the patterns of profiling Scott had only ever read about. The arbitrary enforcement, the disproportionate scrutiny, the othering of a resident who didn't conform to an unwritten, prejudiced code. He realized this wasn't about maintaining property values, it was about power, about pushing him out, about claiming control over his inheritance through sheer, relentless pressure. This oppressive strategy, designed to make him feel unwelcome and eventually break him, mirrored the unjust tactics faced by those targeted by systemic bias, making his fight feel profoundly significant. The pressure reached an unbearable peak when Karen, through her HOA influence, orchestrated a full board meeting under the guise of a neighborhood standards review, specifically for Scott's property. The agenda was packed with accusations, each more spurious than the last, culminating in a proposal to place a lien on his home for unpaid fines and to mandate expensive, unnecessary renovations dictated by Karen herself. Scott arrived to the meeting not with anger, but with a quiet, steely resolve. He had spent weeks meticulously documenting every interaction, every arbitrary fine, every selective enforcement. He had cross-referenced the HOA bylaws with state regulations and discovered a pattern of procedural missteps and outright overreach by Karen and her allies. As the meeting progressed and Karen began her impassioned accusatory presentation, Scott calmly requested a moment to present his findings. He laid out his evidence, not as emotional pleas, but as cold, hard facts. He showed how the fines were improperly issued, how the board had bypassed proper notification protocols, and how the rules Karen was so stringently enforcing were selectively applied. He presented evidence that suggested Karen's actions were not about property standards, but were a calculated, sustained effort to force him out, perhaps due to her own preconceived notions or biases about who belonged in such a prestigious home. The air in the room grew thick with unspoken tension as board members shifted uncomfortably, confronted with undeniable proof of procedural misconduct and a systemic abuse of power. Karen, visibly furious, sputtered protests, but her authority, built on intimidation and manufactured grievances, began to crumble under the weight of Scott's irritable documentation and his calm, logical dismantling of her campaign. The board, faced with Scott's meticulously prepared case and the potential for significant legal repercussions due to their procedural errors and Karen's overreach, was forced to backtrack. The proposed lien was rescinded, the excessive fines were waived, and a formal reprimand was issued to Karen for her conduct and misuse of her position. The battle for his $2 million inheritance home was won not through confrontation, but with unwavering resolve, careful documentation, and a deep understanding of the very systems designed to oppress him. Scott Greene stood not just as a homeowner who had defended his property, but as someone who had confronted the insidious nature of arbitrary power and the damaging patterns of exclusion that can fester even in seemingly perfect communities. His victory was a potent reminder that systems, when unchecked, can become instruments of injustice, disproportionately impacting individuals and echoing the broader struggles against prejudice and discrimination. Karen, stripped of her unchecked influence, faded into the background, her reign of intimidation over. Scott secured not only his inheritance, but also his peace of mind, though the experience left him with a profound awareness of how quickly fairness can be eroded. The takeaway from Scott's ordeal is clear. Vigilance is paramount. When individuals or groups wield power arbitrarily, demanding conformity and enacting selective judgment, it's a battle that must be fought, for the sake of justice itself and for the soul of any community. It forces us to ask, how many other Karens are out there using the rules of the game to deny others their rightful peace and prosperity? And what will it take for their power to finally be turned against them?